What happens when one of America's most beloved talk show hosts comes face to face with a comedian famous for testing limits? The result is nothing less than explosive. Jeff Dunham, the ventriloquist who has filled arenas around the world and built a career on bold puppet humor, suddenly found himself caught in the middle of a clash nobody expected. Kelly Clarkson, normally known for her warm personality and bright energy, revealed a side of herself that left the audience stunned and her guest walking straight off the stage. The tension was heavy, the comments were sharp, and what began as a regular daytime interview turned into one of the most uncomfortable moments ever seen on a talk show. This was not a rehearsed bit. It was not designed for ratings. It was real, unfiltered, and nearly impossible to forget. Before we go into what was actually said and how everything escalated so fast, make sure you tap that subscribe button and leave a comment below sharing your thoughts on what you believe really sparked the blow up. Was Kelly too harsh, or did Jeff step over a line he should have avoided? Tell us what you think. The interview started just like all the others. Kelly Clarkson walked onto her lively, colorful set to loud applause, giving that familiar bright smile that has made her a favorite among daytime viewers. The audience was full of excitement, ready for another episode packed with sweet moments, music, and celebrity chats. When Jeff Dunham was introduced, the room burst into cheers. Whatever people think of him, nobody can deny that Dunham has a huge following, and many of his fans were clearly sitting in that studio. He walked out with his usual confident stride, holding one of his well-known puppet cases, waving to the crowd as they cheered for him. Kelly welcomed him with open arms, literally giving him a hug before they sat down. The cameras showed what looked like true friendliness. Two performers ready to talk about comedy, traveling the country, and living in the spotlight. Kelly began with her normal upbeat tone, praising Jeff for his recent tour and asking how it felt to still pack massive venues after so many years. Jeff answered with his typical relaxed charm, joking about how he never imagined a career built around talking to puppets would last this long. The audience laughed. Kelly laughed. Everything seemed completely fine. But something in the air felt slightly off, a shift that only becomes obvious when looking back at what came later. Kelly's questions slowly started taking on a slightly different feel. She asked Jeff about how his comedy had changed over time, and whether he ever felt like the world had moved forward while his act remained mostly the same. She said it in a casual way, but there was something underneath her words, a hint of criticism wrapped in politeness. Jeff noticed it right away. His smile faded just a little, and he gave a careful answer about comedy being subjective and how his job was simply to make people laugh, not to chase whatever was currently trending. Kelly nodded, but she didn't stop there. She pushed a little harder, asking if he ever got worried about upsetting people and if he ever rethought certain jokes now that audiences seemed more easily offended. The word offended hung in the air, and Jeff's expression changed again. He leaned back slightly, his posture stiffening, and he said something that shifted everything that came afterward. He explained that comedy has always been about pushing limits, making people uncomfortable in order to make them laugh, and that if comedians were expected to avoid offending anyone, then comedy would stop existing. This time the audience reacted differently. Some people clapped, others stayed completely quiet. Kelly's smile failed for a moment before she regained it. She nodded slowly and said she understood his point. But then she asked the question that lit the match. She asked him if there was a difference between pushing limits and simply being insensitive. If maybe some jokes were not about boldness but about laziness. Jeff's jaw tightened instantly. He sat up straight, and the friendly atmosphere from earlier vanished in a heartbeat. He calmly asked Kelly what she meant by that, but there was a clear challenge in his voice. Kelly did not back down. She said that some comedians use the idea of being edgy as an excuse when really they are just repeating old stereotypes that have been around forever. That calling something a joke doesn't automatically make it harmless. Jeff gave a short laugh with no real amusement behind it and said it sounded like she brought him on the show just to judge him. The audience gasped. The discomfort spread across the room like a ripple. Kelly's smile was gone for good now. She leaned in, her voice firmer. She said she brought him there because she wanted an honest conversation and because she respected his success. But she also felt that people with large platforms had a duty to think about how their words affect others. Jeff shook his head and replied that responsibility was just another word for censorship. That comedians worrying more about being responsible than being funny would turn into politicians instead of entertainers. Kelly shot back that caring about how your words impact people is not censorship. It is basic kindness. The room went still. Every person was watching them closely, waiting to see what came next. Jeff leaned forward, his voice a little louder now. He said comedy was never about decency, that it was about rather saying the things people were thinking but were too scared to say. He said his puppets let him explore characters and ideas that made people laugh because they recognized the exaggeration and silliness in them. And then he added that if Kelly couldn't understand that, maybe she didn't understand comedy at all. The room froze. That comment hit hard. Kelly's face flushed, and for a second it seemed like she might end the interview, but she didn't. Instead she took a breath and answered in a cool, controlled tone. She said she understood comedy perfectly well, that she had been in entertainment long enough to know the difference between sharp satire and cheap jokes. She said hiding behind a puppet didn't make a questionable joke more acceptably, it just made it easier to avoid taking responsibility. Jeff's face turned red. He stood up so fast the audience let out a collective gasp. Kelly remained seated at first, staring up at him with shock mixed with defiance. Jeff pointed at her, saying he had spent decades in comedy, earning every bit of his success, and he didn't need to be lectured by someone whose whole career was built on being nice. Kelly rose, her voice sharper now. She said being nice didn't mean being weak, and doing something for a long time didn't automatically make it right. Jeff laughed bitterly and said people like her always think they know better, always trying to control what others say and do. Kelly fired back that holding people accountable isn't controlling them, it's expecting them to grow. The room was thick with tension. Nobody clapped, nobody booed, everyone was frozen, trying to process what they were witnessing. Jeff looked around, then looked back at Kelly. He said he didn't agree to be ambushed on national TV, that if she had problems with his comedy, she should have mentioned it before. Kelly replied that she didn't ambush him at all, that she had asked normal questions. And if he couldn't handle being challenged, maybe he wasn't as confident in his work as he said. That was the final straw. Jeff grabbed his puppet case, told Kelly this was a waste of time, and began walking toward the edge of the stage. Kelly called after him, asking if he was really walking out just because someone disagreed with him. Jeff stopped, turned, and said the line that would echo long after the cameras were off. He said the difference between them was that he made people laugh for a living while she made people feel good about themselves, and only one of those things required real talent. The words sliced through the room. Kelly's face went pale as the audience burst into a mix of shocked gasps, a few boos, and scattered nervous laughs. Jeff didn't stay to hear her reply. He turned back and kept walking. Kelly stood frozen, her mouth slightly open, clearly stunned. But then something in her expression changed. The shock melted into anger. She refused to let him have the final word. She called out loudly, saying talent wasn't only about making people laugh. It was about connecting with others, lifting them up rather than knocking them down. Jeff stopped again, this time not turning around right away. The room held its breath. When he finally faced her, his expression was a mix of anger and something softer, almost like hurt. He stepped back toward the center of the stage, close enough for the cameras to catch everything, but not enough to sit down. He said he had connected with audiences for over 3 decades, selling out huge arenas while many comedians couldn't fill small clubs. His fans loved him because he wasn't afraid to say what everyone else avoided, because he made audiences feel free to laugh at things society labeled off limits. Kelly shook her head and said that encouraging people to laugh at harmful stereotypes wasn't brave, it was lazy. She said, real comedy makes people rethink things, not reinforce old beliefs. Jeff's voice rose again. He said she didn't know anything about real comedy, that she lived in a world where everything was softened and safe, and the biggest risk she ever took was singing someone else's song. The comment was deeply personal. Kelly's eyes widened. She stepped closer and said at least she didn't hide behind characters. At least she was herself when she performed. Jeff laughed harshly and said his characters were pieces of the human experience, and if she was too narrow-minded to understand that, it wasn't his issue. The audience was completely divided, some yelling at Jeff, others at Kelly, while producers scrambled behind the scenes. Kelly cut through the noise with a steady voice. She said she understood his characters perfectly well. They were caricatures used to get easy laughs from people who enjoyed making fun of others. Jeff's face tightened. He said the term punching down was created by people who wanted to control comedy and decide what was acceptable. Comedy, he said, had no borders, and adding rules would turn it into propaganda instead of art. Kelly argued back instantly, saying that art without any sense of responsibility was just chaos. Words mattered. Performers with platforms had no choice but to acknowledge that. She said she built her career on honesty and kindness and refused to apologize for believing those qualities mattered. Jeff shook his head slowly. He said kindness was often just another word for weakness, that the entertainment industry was filled with people who pretended to care but didn't. At least he was honest about who he was. Kelly lowered her voice, more intense now. She said honesty without empathy was simply cruelty, and maybe he had been performing for so long that he forgot how to be a real person. That line hit him harder than anything before. Jeff went quiet, truly quiet. For the first time during the entire argument, the audience sensed the shift and fell into a tense silence. Jeff stared at Kelly, and Kelly stared right back. When he finally spoke again, his voice was softer but still edged with pain. He said she didn't know anything about his life, about the struggles he faced, or what he had sacrificed. He said it was easy for her to talk about compassion when she had success handed to her after winning a TV show. Kelly's expression hardened. She said nothing in her life was handed to her, that she fought for everything she earned. Using her success against her was just a weak attempt to dodge the real conversation. She said it wasn't about careers at all, it was about how people used their influence. Jeff scoffed and said influence was just a trendy word, and people needed to stop pretending entertainers were in charge of solving world issues. His job was to make people laugh, nothing more. If people got offended, that was their problem. Kelly stepped closer, raising her voice slightly. She said that with millions of people watching and listening, he didn't get to pretend his words meant nothing. Every time he made a joke about a marginalized group, he sent a message that mocking them was acceptable. Jeff threw his hands up, frustrated. He said everything counted as a marginalized group now, and comedians couldn't say anything without someone claiming to be hurt. Comedy used to be fun, he said, but now it felt like a trap where one wrong joke could cost you your career. Kelly disagreed firmly. She said no one was trying to end his career. She only wanted him to think a little more about the impact of what he said. Comedy could be daring and still not be harmful. Jeff laughed again. A sharp laugh. He said harm was subjective, that what offended one person might make another laugh until they cried. Trying to please everyone meant creating boring, lifeless comedy. Kelly quietly replied that she wasn't asking him to please everyone, only to consider everyone. And if he couldn't do that, maybe he didn't deserve the platform he had. The room froze again. Those words hung in the air like a final warning. Jeff's expression shifted quickly from anger to shock to something like resignation. He picked up his puppet case again, this time gripping it tightly. He told Kelly the conversation was done. He showed up expecting a professional interview, not a personal attack disguised as discussion. Kelly said it was only an attack if he felt guilty. All she did was ask the questions he should have been thinking about years ago. Jeff shook his head one last time. He said he didn't feel guilty for making people happy, for giving them laughter when everything else in the world felt harsh and judgmental from people like her. He said she could keep her compassion and her influence, and he would keep making people laugh. Kelly replied softly, almost with sadness, that she hoped someday he would understand those things didn't have to clash, that he could make people laugh and still treat others with respect. Jeff didn't answer. He turned around and walked off stage again. This time no one tried to stop him. Kelly watched him leave, breathing deeply. The crowd sat in total shock. The cameras kept rolling, capturing everything. Kelly slowly returned to her seat, running a hand through her hair. The studio was silent except for the sound of shifting feet. A producer approached quietly. Kelly waved them off. She looked into the camera and explained that nothing about what happened was planned. "Sometimes conversations get heated," she said, "especially when both people believe strongly in their views." Her voice was steady but shaky at the edges. She said difficult conversations matter, laughter matters, kindness matters. And she didn't regret her questions. She stood by them. The audience clapped, first softly, then loudly. Kelly smiled a little, though the smile didn't reach her eyes. Meanwhile, Jeff rushed through the back halls, ignoring the staff trying to check on him. He shoved open the stage door, stepped into the bright sunlight, and walked fast toward his car. He tossed his puppet case inside, got in, and slammed the door behind him. He looked out the window, still angry, but beneath the anger was something else, something uncomfortable, something uncertain. His driver asked if he was okay. Jeff didn't reply. Leaving the stage was supposed to feel like a proud moment. Instead it felt messy and heavy. He imagined the video clips already spreading on linear, his angry face, his cutting comments, his abrupt exit. Watching himself from the outside, the whole thing looked different. It looked like two people talking past each other, neither willing to hear the other side. Back in her dressing room, Kelly felt the weight of the moment too. Her hands trembled. She had hosted so many episodes, interviewed so many stars, and handled countless emotional moments. But nothing like this. She never intended for Jeff to leave angry. She wanted a conversation, not a fight. But it spiraled and she couldn't undo it. Cameras caught the argument, but they didn't catch the doubts that came afterward. Maybe that is the real story, and not just the shouting or the dramatic walk-off, but the quiet questions in the aftermath. The questions we all ask after a conflict. Was I right? Was I fair? Did I go too far? Was I misunderstood? Or was it simply more complicated than either person wanted to admit? So what do you think? Was Kelly right to challenge Jeff, or did she cross a line? Should Jeff have stayed and finished the discussion, or was walking off the only choice he felt he had? Leave your answer below and let use a broken bar.